So, Mr. Sohan, I would like to raise my first question as regarding the geopolitical shifts during the past 3 years. I mean, since the beginning of the pandemic, and then there was this Ukraine-Russian war, I think a lot of things have changed, and at the global level and also at the regional level. So how do you see this change in global level, global order, I would like to see, and how long do you think the related changes in the global landscape will continue to impact business and economy?
First of all, thank you so much for receiving me. I'm very, very pleased to be with such a distinguished audience. I will try to answer the questions, but then later during the lunchtime, let's have some discussion about these issues, because there are no easy answers. There have been one big negative and one big positive events over the last 3 or 4 years, and then we have the underlying trend. The big negative event is what we consider the Russian attack on Ukraine. This is a completely unnecessary war. It's not clear what the Russian war aims are, and it needs to come to an end as soon as possible. There needs to be a negotiable settlement. Maybe China can play a role as a peacemaker. Maybe Turkey and President Erdogan will be the peacemaker. I also saw that President Lula of Brazil, when he came to China, suggested that a committee of like-minded nations, like maybe China and India and Brazil, will be formed to help peace in Ukraine. But this is urgent. A big positive news, and that is an enormous accomplishment of Chinese diplomacy, that is to bring Iran and Saudi Arabia together. This will have numerous positive effects. One is that the proxy wars between Saudi Arabia and Iran, like the war in Yemen, in all likelihood will come down and stop. And we should still remember that more people have died in Yemen than in Ukraine, only that the Yemen war has not been at the highlights on global media. Another positive impact of the truce between Saudi Arabia and Iran is that the Middle East nations will be able to put a focus on economic development. And these nations have tons of money, they're very rich. If they focus on development, it will be a major positive impetus to the global economy. I believe that the reason why Saudi Arabia has made this deal with Iran is very similar to what Deng Xiaoping did in China in 1980, which was to say, our entire focus is domestic economic development. If that's the focus, we cannot have a lot of quarrels with other nations. But because the main long-term issue is relationship between China and the United States and how to establish a multipolar global order. Most important is US and China, which are the two major powers of our era, but of course also Europe, India, Turkey, Brazil, Indonesia, and many other powers which should also be included. The main responsibility for a better global climate rests with the United States of America. Look, for the first 100 years of the history of the United States, they were totally dominant power in the Americas. They even had the Monroe Doctrine saying that no foreign power should ever do anything in the Americas. And then for the next 100 years, the United States was the totally dominant global power. And deep down, for most Americans, it's very hard to accept that China is an equal power. China is far from equal to the United States when it comes to military power, when it comes to economy or ecology or technology or any other area. China is an equal power. And the rest of the world simply needs to tell Americans, please vote, please wake up, this is the 21st century. They also believe China can do more to avoid conflicts. Because China is now so big, so powerful, much bigger than any other nation, the biggest economy in the world on par with the United States, and has a thousands of years long culture. It's difficult for smaller nations to relate to China because China is so big and powerful and important. So whenever there is a quarrel between China and a smaller nation on largely secondary issues, say some small islands in the South China Sea or some border issues to India up in the Himalayas, China should take a flexible position. Because frankly, these are all very small issues compared to the big perspective of the world. And when some politician in a smaller nation criticize or attack China, there is no need for China to be defensive and hit back. China can just let it pass. But still, even if China can do more, the main responsibility for a better global relationship rests with the United States of America, because they are the core of this conflict at the moment.
Okay, thanks. And since you have mentioned actually really the U.S., China, and also like China, EU, I would like to talk a little bit in that direction, because in China right now, the public opinions, some people believe that Europeans are just a followers, sidekicks like of the United States, which it might not be the truth. And I think the EU has its own like strategy and its own like viewpoints vis-a-vis China. And how do you understand this? And do you think that in the future there will be also a major shift in the EU policy, not only foreign affairs policy, but also business policies towards China, towards China's business people, Chinese researchers, students, and society?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think there are two trends happening at the same time in Europe. One is, of course, that historically, and when it comes to people-to-people contact, Europe is much closer to America than we are to China. There are as many people of Norwegian descent in the United States than there are in Norway. If you go to states like Minnesota and Dakotas in the US, there are Norwegians and Swedes all over the place. And of course, Norwegians or Europeans are overwhelmingly influenced by the US when it comes to culture. However, Korea is now coming up as a major and global power. My wife is watching K-movies and my daughter is watching K-pop all the time. Interestingly, at this stage, the much smaller Korea is still much more powerful when it comes to culture in the globalized world than China. This will change, but that's the present situation. So on one hand, Europe is close to America when it comes to cultural and people-to-people's ties, and of course historical economic ties. But there is also a strong desire in Europe to establish a third pole. You would have seen that when President Macron came and met with President Xi Jinping, President Macron of France said afterwards that he wanted Europe to establish what we call strategic autonomy. When some Americans want to divide the world into one American and one Chinese sphere, they have a hard sell, because very few Europeans and no African, no Asian really want that choice. Everyone wants a close relationship with both China and the US. So ultimately, I'm absolutely convinced the idea of economic or political decoupling, it will fail.
The next question will be a little bit about Norway, since you have mentioned. And recently, I think the Chinese foreign affairs minister right now is paying a visit to Europe, first as at Germany and France, and then surprisingly Norway. And because I think the bilateral relationship is never like really in top media like during the last few years. And how do you see that development? And do you think Norway can be a really good opportunity for Chinese investment and in the future, or technology companies in Europe?
So we should, as soon as possible, re-establish all these business, political, and people-to-people contact that will have positive impact on everything. Unfortunately, the way China is perceived in Western media and Norwegian media in particular is very negative. And most of the people writing about China has basically no knowledge about China, unfortunately. Say someone was writing about the United States and they had no idea where is California or where is Texas, it would be a joke. But when intellectuals write about China in Western media and they ask them, by the way, where is Guangdong or where is Shandong, they would have no answer. Or if I were to ask them, by the way, what was the Taiping Rebellion, they would have no answer. The Taiping Rebellion killed 30 times more people than the American Civil War. Still, no European and no Americans had ever heard about the Taiping Rebellion. Everyone knows about the American Civil War. So we need to establish a platform of more respect and more knowledge, but that can only happen when we reopen all sorts of relations in business and politics and everywhere else, and that's why it's so useful that the Chinese Foreign Minister is coming to Norway. And very briefly, Norway is a very much ocean-related economy. We have offshore oil drilling, we have big shipping companies, we are one of the biggest fishing and fish farming nations in the world. So the main opportunities for Chinese-Norwegian business relations, I believe, is in the area of energy and ocean.
Thanks. I think Norway is also famous for innovation. I would like to say it's one of the most innovative countries in the world. And do you think like Chinese technology companies, they also have these opportunities or chances to build together with the Norwegian or other European Nordic countries and their intellectuals, their technology companies to co-build this technology platform? Because if we look at if we look in Europe, Europe is lagging behind the US and China when it comes to AI, big data, all these newly developed tools, I would like to say. So do you think that will be a chance in the future for both sides?
Very frankly, when it comes to this, Europe is struggling. Look, the Industrial Revolution happened first in the United Kingdom. They were very innovative. Then the car was invented in Stuttgart, in Germany, by the Daimler and the Benz. But today, what is the most valuable company in Europe in stock exchange value? You should know because you are a lady. That's Louis Vuitton. And whatever you think about nice bags, is not in the forefront of the technological development of the world. The US has Amazon and Google and Apple. China has Huawei and Tencent and Alibaba. The most valuable tech companies in Europe, like say Siemens, are far, far behind. As you said, artificial intelligence is totally dominated by two nations, the United States and China. But due to the Green Revolution, it's now in every technology led by China. Just one example, CATL and BYD, two Chinese companies alone, now have more than 50% of the global market for electric batteries. And all the reports from the Shanghai Auto Fair 3 weeks ago was about how the eye-opener for the Volkswagen and the General Motors to see how far BYD and about 10 other Chinese companies have come in the electrical vehicle revolution just during COVID. There are 140 Chinese cities at the size of or bigger than my hometown of Oslo, the capital of Norway. 140 cities are bigger in China. And I think basically every one of these cities have now an energy valley or a high-tech park or some area where high-tech companies, battery companies, green companies are moving very, very fast into the green revolution and the high-tech revolution. There are these kind of industrial parks, I think basically all the 140 cities. And of course the shift from industries to service business happened first in Europe and America. And frankly, both Americans and the Europeans are struggling to meet the power of the industries of China. But of course, your underlying idea is right. I mean, we need to cooperate, we need to exchange views, we need to exchange technologies. Technology exchange is not, I think, for political leaders, it's basically happening within business. And we should encourage more of it.
Okay, thanks a lot. And since you were actually a Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, and you must know quite a lot about this multinational governments at the global level. And my next question will be about WTO, because right now I see this clear trend at the global level. The US is trying to marginalize WTO, and EU was at the beginning, Europe at large was at the beginning against this approach, but right now Europe is questioning about how we can reform, how we can maintain this multilateral, global governance structure. And if there is no WTO tomorrow or after tomorrow, US is really willing to set up this global trade order according to its own interests. And how do you see it? And I think that will be definitely not good news for Chinese manufacturers, of course, and also for the others. And do you think that will be true, and do you think it's coming?
There is a lot to admire in the United States, but not their hypocrisy when it comes to global standards. The US claim that they are representative of what they call a rule-based global order. But the main nation undermining global rules at the moment is exactly the United States of America. They withdrew from the Paris Climate Deal, not China, nor any other nation. The United States did. They are not respecting the rules of the World Trade Organization, which basically was established by exactly the United States of America. They withdrew from UNESCO, which is the main body for cultural and science exchange. And they want President Putin to be put before the International Criminal Court, which the United States has not accepted, and where they will not accept any court case against any American politician or general for war crimes in Iraq or any other case. I strongly believe, as you, that the World Trade Organization has a very important role to play, and that can only happen if China, India, Europe, Brazil, and others come together to defend this rule-based order and tell the Americans that please you need to join us in this, because this will benefit everyone. But much wider reforms of the global system, including the UN, is needed. At the moment, the UN is basically absent from world affairs. It was China, not the UN, which brought Saudi Arabia and Iran together. No one expects the UN to bring peace to Ukraine. And the main talks this year is in the forum of G20, very ably hosted by Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India, not in the UN. G20 is this year much more important. The UN is a very bureaucratic, sometimes even corrupt structure, which needs deep reforms. Whatever money channeled through the UN tend to be inefficient compared to private investment. And just at the end, pointing to the obvious, India is now on the par with China. Very soon India will be the most populous nation in the world. But India is not on the Security Council of the UN. UK is there. France is there. Yes, true, the UK was a major power 100 years ago. But who claims that the United Kingdom is a major power today? India is. The United Kingdom is not. So obviously, EU should represent Europe in the Security Council, and India should be there. There are 1,400 million people in India, 60 million in the UK. The Indian economy is much more bigger, much more important. So how can we continue with that world where the UK is on the Security Council but India is not? It gives no sense.